Hey, Raybon, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another NFL episode of the Action Network Live Show. I'm Matthew Freedman, the editor-in-chief of Fantasy Labs. Here with me is Chris Raybon, a senior editor and analyst at the Action Network and a co-host of the Action Network show on Sirius XM Fantasy Radio. Chris, happy week one.
Thank you, Matt. It's getting to be that time of year. We're finally getting all that hard work paying off of all the research we did over the offseason. So I'm excited.
Yep. All right. For today's show, we are talking about the ramifications of Ezekiel Elliott's contract situation, which this is an ongoing saga. I feel like we've been talking about this for like 3 or 4 days, adjusting rankings and projections back and forth. I know this is going to go another day. It's at some point they're going to be like, oh, he wanted 100 million instead of 90. But anyway, so hopefully this is the last time we're talking about this. But we're going to talk about this. We're looking at week one waiver wire picks. We're taking a look at our week one rankings, and we're answering fantasy questions, which you can submit in the chat below the video. Raybon, let us jump into it. So Ezekiel Elliott, per reports by Adam Schefter and others, is very close to signing a $90 million contract extension with the Cowboys. If that happens, presumably he's playing in week one. So we would like to get your thoughts on that. Is he playing without restriction? Is he playing on a, quote unquote pitch count? So what are our projections for that? How are we adjusting him within our fantasy draft kit? And then also our week one rankings.
So, I'm starting to move him up in the draft kit. I think, that the season long ranking, it's just about the fact that when holdout running backs this drags on like close to the regular season, they do tend to get injured a little bit more. So I have Zeke projected at just around 14 games right now. Normal running backs get projected at about 14.5. So he's kind of back to where he should be. And for this week, assuming he does play, I knocked off about 3 carries and 1.5 receptions. So about just under 5 total touches. He was averaging, almost 25, actually more than 25 last year, 25.6. So there he could lose a good 15 to 20% of his workload, which I think is a fair estimate. And he still is a top 6 running back in my model. So that just shows how valuable he is when he's on the field. So I'm not bumping him down too much, assuming he plays. I do think they do want to involve Pollard. I think that was true before the holdout. Like I think they really do like Pollard, and they want to take some of the receiving workload at least away from Zeke, because they do have other guys to do that now, whereas they didn't always have that. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Okay, in the draft cheat sheet that we have open here, you have Ezekiel Elliott right now at number 6 at among running backs in PPR. You're probably going to move him up a little bit in week one rankings, which you, Sean Corner, and I released these this morning, and I think this is a really wonderful format that we have here, where you can kind of scroll through. You can see our top 5, but then you can also get the link to go wherever you want. So for PPR in the running back rankings that we have, I was really overzealous in bumping Ezekiel Elliott down before the news came. I had him at 31. I was basically thinking it was something like a 50-50 proposition that he would play in week one. So I had him down. I had Tony Pollard in the top 10. You, I think, were assuming that Zeke was going to play. So you already have him at number 5. That is, you think, where he's going to stay in your week one rankings, correct?
Yeah, like at this point now, I'm just assuming he's going to play. Like if it shifts again, I'll bump it back down. But that's essentially the nature of, forecasting. You kind of just updating with what information you have. And there was a while there where I think you had I had him at, 12, 13-ish games, which is about the average. Running backs who do hold out, the average about 3.5 games missed. But again, a good chunk of those games are due to injury. So Zeke, I was never as pessimistic on as I was am for Melvin Gordon, which I
Yeah.
think I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think, like, I've heard Austin Eckler being mentioned in some places as like, do I start him or not? Like, yes, you do start him. I think both you and I both have him as a top 10 back. And I think Justin Jackson is right on the, he can push for flex value as well. If there's like something like a 60-40 or a 50-50 split, because the Colts scheme, their defensive scheme under Matt Eberflus, they don't give up a lot of passes to wide receivers. They force teams to kind of check the ball underneath and check it down and drop a lot of guys into coverage. So I really like the Chargers backs this week as well.
All right, so I was slightly wrong. I had Tony Pollard at 11 in PPR, assuming that Zeke wasn't going to play. I do want to kind of not push back, but I want to think about this a little bit, because it seems as if the Cowboys are talking out of both sides of their mouths, where on the one hand, they like Tony Pollard. They gave him a lot of work in the preseason. He looked good. He had a good athletic profile coming out of college. He was productive. They spent a 4th rounder on him, which isn't a premium pick, but it's not insignificant. Like, they have gotten really good production out of 3rd and 4th round running backs in the past. So for them, that is a pick that actually means something. So on the one hand, it's reasonable to think that if they indicate that Tony Pollard is someone that they like and they want to give touches, that is something that is real. On the other hand, they're just paying Zeke as if he's the most important back in the league. And it's hard to kind of reconcile the different investment in the messages that they are sending. So what are your thoughts there?
So, I mean, I actually don't think it's that hard to reconcile. You're paying a guy this much money. You want to give him a lot of touches, but you want to kind of balance it out. Like over 25 a game, that's just too much, and I think they know that. They have Kellen Moore again. So like, I think one of the things with the Cowboys that I'm paying a lot of attention to is kind of the gradual change in who's in charge, and organizationally, I feel like they have been getting sharper over the last few years in many areas as far as how they manage a team, build a roster or whatnot. And now with Kellen Moore as the offensive coordinator, I think you mentioned it. Like, we don't know. He could be bad. He could be good. But one thing he is he's very young. He's played in this league not too long ago, like maybe a couple years ago. And he is bringing fresh ideas and kind of a forward-thinking mind. Now, will that translate to actual success on the field? I think it should, given their personnel, but I do think that we are going to see Pollard, because I just don't think that it's feasible, and I don't think they think it's feasible to pay a guy this much money and risk injury to that extent. So I do think you're going to see Pollard either way, and it's kind of the one, like, that they had a lot of success doing that with Zeke last year. So it's something that I think they want to continue giving Dak, those options underneath, in addition to the guys like a Gallup and a Cooper that kind of really open up that offense.
All right. You talked about Justin Jackson, and he is someone you highlighted in the waiver wire piece that we published yesterday on Action Network. Talk a little bit about him. He's someone that caught your eye. I was on Alexander Madison and Jamison Crowder, but out of Justin Jackson's range of outcomes, where do you think we kind of are for week 1 and moving forward for the season?
So I think Jackson, if you look at, what he's done, now we don't have a huge sample size to go off of, but, he had a 10 target game when Eckler was out once, and he had a 16 carry game where both of them were out. And he's kind of, there was a game where he and Eckler kind of had like about a little over 60% of the touches when it was just him and Eckler and Gordon was out. So he tends to be involved. I think his floor, or median, maybe I should say, is more like a workload in the old Eckler role touch range. Like, I think 7 to 10 touches is fair to expect from him. However, this is a talented back. This is a guy that profiles a little bit more as a true lead back than Eckler does. Although I think Ken Wisenhunt, we've seen him in the past give a ton of carries to a guy like Danny Woodhead. So I don't know if that's going to stop him. But, this is a guy who, if he has success this week in week 1, which he very well could, because again, the Colts like to make opposing offenses kind of go underneath and kind of dink and dunk it to get down the field. If he scores a touchdown, maybe gets, double-digit touches, I think his trade value will increase. And I don't I don't think Melvin Gordon will be back in week 2 either. So you'll have a good situation on your hand if he still is available on your waiver wire. He's available in about 60%, almost 70% of leagues. When I wrote the article, I'm sure that's going, that's going up now. But this is a valuable guy to have. I think the schedule over the first quarter of the season is pretty light for the Chargers, and you could have a potential league winner. For some reason, Gordon just decides not to come back, or he doesn't come back to like week 10 or 11 or something like that.
Yeah, I hear that, understand it. The guy I actually like, I don't know if I'd say I'd like him more, but Alexander Madison, owned in only 23% of Yahoo leagues. And the thing that really intrigues me is that I think he could have the goal line job with the Vikings. Whereas with Justin Jackson, I'm kind of not sure exactly how he's going to be used, but I think Madison, like the Latavius Murray role or something approximating it, I think that's pretty clearly where he fits in. And he's playing behind a back in Dalvin Cook, who is explosive, but has had injury concerns over the past 2 years. And so if Madison is able to play at a minimum the Latavius Murray role and also has the upside of future lead back work if Dalvin Cook is gone, and if he has that potential in I don't want to say it is actually a Gary Kubiak offense, but Kubiak is there as an assistant. It seems as if he is having a pretty heavy hand in the shaping of the running game. So if Madison could be the lead back in a system like that, I think he's an automatic league winner. But to get someone like that on his own with built-in usage already, I think is a pretty good proposition. And then another guy who really caught my eye is Jamison Crowder. And this is specifically for PPR scoring. Not that I think Crowder is actually all that great of a player, but he's in a situation with the Jets where Chris Herndon, the tight end, is suspended for the first 4 games. So I think there will be more targets in the middle of the field that will be funneled to Crowder. And then outside wide receiver Robbie Anderson is also dealing with a calf issue. It's uncertain if he's going to be able to play in week 1. So there could just be a lot of targets available. And Adam Gase, as the head coach, has historically funneled targets to his slot receivers. Jarvis Landry with the Dolphins, Wes Welker and Emmanuel Sanders with the Broncos. So I think there is potential there for Crowder to get a lot of usage. And even if it's not the type of usage that turns into a lot of yards or a lot of touchdowns in PPR, I still think it's pretty valuable as someone who's owned in, less than 50% of the leagues. So that is the waiver wire. Chris, let's talk about the projections. The rankings rather, that we have for week 1. And I'm curious about any of the guys you might want to talk about who kind of surprised you when you were creating their rankings. And it was like, oh, I wasn't really expecting this guy to be as high in the rankings, but this is, what the numbers have given me. Like, who are some guys that you were surprised to be as high on as you are?
That's a good question. I'm looking at my rankings right now. I spent so much time in the spreadsheet that it's sad to say, but like nothing surprises me anymore.
That's fair.
So I'm looking right now, and I would say, I know I was high on Leonard Fournette, talked about this on one of these previous shows a couple of days ago, actually in season long. But he's right neck and neck with Le'Veon Bell in my model. And Sean Corner, we actually recorded a great episode of the Action Network podcast a few moments ago with Sean and Rich Rebar. And Sean made a good point that, Bell is another guy that potentially could get eased in. They've been giving Ty Montgomery a lot of work. If I jump Fournette, he goes to number 6 in my model. And I think he has a ton of upside as long as he's healthy and on the field, because if you look at his usage, he left a couple of games early, but in all the games he finished played start to finish. I mean, he was 20 touches. He was pushing for 30 touches in many of those games, and that's on par with the workload he received as a rookie. There are reports that he, admittedly is in, wasn't in good shape these first couple of years, is in a better place now. So I think while he's healthy right now, huge upside against the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think that actually goes for the entire Jaguars offense, because I have Dede Westbrook. I believe he's in the top 25 in PPR for me. And Nick Foles snuck in as my quarterback 24. And I actually he might bump up another spot or two as well. So I think there's a lot of value with this Jaguars offense because their implied point total in this game against the Chiefs is 24. This is a team that averaged under 20 points per game last season. So even if you were to regress that, you would not get a projection of 24, anywhere close to it, without, some substantial kind of improvements to the offense, which I think will happen with DeFilippo coming over. And I think Fournette's going to get a lot more passing down work just because they lost Benny Cunningham, who was going to serve as like their Yeldon, and then they lost Alfred Blue. So they really have nothing behind Fournette at this point.
Yeah. For me, one of the surprising guys is actually three guys all on the same team. The Bengals, Joe Mixon, I have him in the top 10, which I guess it isn't all that surprising. I feel like he's in that general range, but I'm on the higher end of the range. I have him at 8. You have him at 14. I was high on Tyler Boyd and then also high on Tyler Eifert. I just think with AJ Green gone, they're going to skew a little bit more towards the run, but then also with the available targets, there's pretty much no one else on the team to catch those targets except for Boyd and Eifert. And then, of course, some of those could be funneled as well to Mixon and then Giovanni Bernard. But I'm higher than I kind of want to be on all three of those guys. Do you have thoughts on those guys?
Yeah. And it's funny because Rich and Sean, this is why it's great to kind of do these talk to people, these sharp people, like early in the week, and we kind of get together and discuss these things. Because I took an over prop on Tyler Eifert's yardage, and I kind of regret it because the more I look at it, I think Eifert may struggle because the Seahawks really do a good job shutting down the tight end. They do have Bobby Wagner in the middle. They also the tight end is definitely the position. If you look at the PFF matchup chart, I believe it's Bradley McDougald is giving up the lowest yards per route run of any safety, matched up with a tight end. So I think they might be able to scheme him out of the game a bit. But I think that's going to be good news for the other guys as far as the dump offs. But I think I am going to actually get some action on the other side of that yardage prop.
Some real action.
Right. Yeah, some real action. But yeah, because I'm not as bullish, and this is kind of how my process is. First it starts with kind of creating the initial baseline projections, and when there's a target share to be had, that does kind of spread around to all the players. But then as you go through the week, you start digging in a little deeper to some of these matchups, and you kind of your view gets a little more focused. So yeah, I think Boyd will be able to have more success, and I do think the running backs we'll see a lot of work in the passing game. Worried about Eifert and worried about I don't know if Mixon gets a ton of yards on the ground. I think he's going to have to do it through the air because the Bengals O-line is in flux right now. The Seahawks defense isn't great, but I mean they're adding pieces. They got Clowney. Like I think they're going to be okay. And in my model, when you have a team that's like a huge underdog like this in a low point total, that affects their rushing attempts in my model. So I do have, let me see, Mixon getting, let's see what it is, point. Yeah, so his rushing attempt factor is for me like about 3-4% lower than it would be, for in his baseline game. So that's that's pretty significant in the model. So I think he's going to make that up in the passing game, but that's actually beneficial in PPR.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, let's talk about maybe a couple players that you were surprised you were as low on. And I think I can start here if you want. I am pretty low on Lamar Jackson. And I really wasn't expecting it. And the thing is, like in the season long models too, which it makes sense because the weekly projections, at least at the beginning, are partially derived from your season long projections. But I've been lower on Lamar Jackson throughout this process than I thought I would be. And so Sean Corner has him at 5. You have him at 14. I have him at 18. So we are kind of in the same spot there, relatively speaking, on being low on Jackson, because intellectually, like I want to put him in the top 8, because of his rushing upside. And then also the matchup that he has against the Dolphins who are just in total disarray. So on the one hand, I think he should be up there. Like if I just had to create rankings without having them based on projections. On the other hand, I've crunched numbers and this is kind of where he slots in for me. What are your thoughts with Jackson?
I'm with you, actually. I talked about it a little bit in my play calling tendencies article, the big one I did a couple of weeks back. Like if you kind of map out the potential range of outcomes for Jackson, like you think he's like this super high ceiling, low floor player, when in actuality, he's like this very solid, like high floor player that he would have to make like substantial gains in his passing efficiency and volume to really find that ceiling, because he already essentially hit the ceiling as far as the rushing. Like there's only so much more of an outlier you can be at this point. Like, so his rushing attempts probably go down. And this is another situation where, yes, it's an easy matchup, but that doesn't necessarily, that's not necessarily good for quarterbacks overall, because it just means that he won't have to drop back as much, and that means like, just because, in these games where you have a big favorite and a low point total, like the Ravens are, I believe they're 7-point favorites with an over under of 37. I think most people tend to bump up like all the rushing stats for the team that's favored. But I do it a little bit different. Like I'm looking at dropbacks for the quarterback. So the running back handoffs for me are bumping up a lot more than like Jackson's raw volume, or whatnot, because a lot of his runs do come on scrambles. And even if they are kind of in a good game script, I see less reason for them to design runs for him and take that chance in a game like this. So I'm not giving him as much of a bump. Just kind of the way I go about my projections. I'm guessing you're kind of in the same boat.
Yeah, that's very much a part of it. I'm not expecting him to have, I mean, maybe he'll get double-digit rushes this game, but I'm not expecting him to approach like the 16 rushes per game he was getting last year. There's not the need for it in this game where they can hand the ball off to a running back and do without exposing their quarterback to extra hits. So that's kind of where I'm seeing this going. So unless they really let him throw the ball a lot, I kind of don't see the upside there with him. Okay, let's get into some of the questions. The first one is from Anthony. Hey, what quarterbacks would you take first in a 10-team, 2-quarterback standard scoring league? So one thing you could actually do if you wanted, let me make sure I'm actually at the right page here. You can go into our draft kit and you can set this out. So you could have 10 teams here. You could have 2 quarterbacks and it's standard, and then you can generate the cheat sheet. So I think the question is how I think there are a number of quarterbacks here that you can see, but I think the question is sort of like, where in the range of first rounders do you kind of want to take a quarterback, or like who is like the minimum quarterback you're fine with having as your top guy? Because if you think you can get someone like Baker Mayfield in the second round, or you can get Kyler Murray in the second round, you'd maybe, you consider doing that at least, instead of going with Mahomes or Watson or Rodgers in the first round. But Raybon, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, this generally follows my overall prognosis on quarterbacks this year. It's just you're taking them in a little different spots. But I like to wait until like about 8 to 10, sometimes even more, are off the board. And then I like to draft a couple. I like Mahomes and Watson a ton. I love Mayfield, but I just feel like a lot of times there are quarterbacks that are drafted outside that top 8, outside that top 10 even, that I think have the top 5 upside as well, like a Jared Goff, a Kyler Murray. Those guys don't always get drafted. Carson Wentz, like all these guys, they go a little later. So I really like kind of you still wait and take advantage of that upside. Like you just have to be more aware of like where the quarterbacks are going, because they're obviously going to be flying off the board quicker. But I still kind of wait for X number to be off the board. It's usually in that 8 to 12 range. And then I try to, get a couple of upside picks in that tier because it's giving you upside in terms of your draft capital, because you're usually able to get an extra pick or two versus somebody that reached on a quarterback, and only one person is going to get Mahomes. So it's not the end of the world if you miss out on like a Mahomes or a Watson.
Yeah, if you don't have a top 6 pick, you probably aren't getting Mahomes anyway, and I imagine Watson goes shortly after that. If you really want a quarterback in the first round, I think Mahomes and Watson are the only two I would really consider. I don't want Rodgers in the first round, and I think it is fine even to just to forego the position in the first round. You can attack it in the second round or the third round, and then a couple rounds after that, you can go after someone who has, kind of a higher floor because of his rushing capability. Maybe you can get Trubisky at some point, or you can go for Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. But I think it's fine to wait a little bit, bypass the position in the first round and go after it later.
Yeah. And I mean, this sounds crazy, but a lot of those guys you just mentioned have like a higher floor than, I would say, Aaron Rodgers. And it sounds crazy to say because obviously Rodgers, Hall of Fame talent, but the per attempt efficiency just hasn't been there without Jordy Nelson. And that he's not running a ton the way he used to. So that does actually give him a low floor. I mean, this guy had a 25-2 touchdown interception ratio, and he was like, a solid QB1, but it wasn't like the spectacular Rodgers we're used to seeing. And I think Matt LaFleur, coming in is trying to change the way he plays, get the ball out quicker. And while that might be, good for coaches who go crazy when he doesn't follow the script of the play, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be good for fantasy owners. I mean, we saw, the Titans offense go into even bigger hole kind of last year and just like, screw it, let's just ride the running back. So I don't think Rodgers, we're at the point where you can draft Rodgers like confidently as like, oh, this is the guy if Mahomes and Watson are off the board. I'd rather have Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Kyler Murray, and Matt Ryan as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, a couple more questions. The first one is from Baker. Hey guys, I need an extra running back. Who would you drop to pick him up? Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones, James Washington, and then the available backs: Rashad Penny, Peyton Barber, Singletary, Henderson, Chris Thompson, or Darwin Thompson. So what are your thoughts there? Who would you drop if you would drop any of those wide receivers, and which running back would you pick up?
I mean, the drop is obviously James Washington.
Yeah.
It's like a whole different tier of player. And you got to I think we get kind of, and I loved Washington last year actually. And the same thing kind of happened. He tore up the preseason. But the thing you got to remember about these guys is, while their upside is tantalizing, this is fantasy and predictability matters, right? And that's probably why you're dropping a receiver for a back in the first place. Will Washington have some big weeks like he did in the preseason? I'm sure. Will you know when they are going to occur and be able to get him in your lineup? Probably not. So I don't think there's a ton of value in holding on to a guy like Washington. He's a guy that you kind of hope you strike lightning in a bottle when he is on the waiver wire and you pick him up in the right week and he goes off. But would definitely drop him. And then which were the running backs available now?
Rashad Penny, Peyton Barber, Singletary, Darrell Henderson, Chris Thompson, and Darwin Thompson. I think it's between Penny and Barber.
Yeah, although I mean, so I would put Henderson in that conversation. But it sounds like if you need a running back, I guess you probably need a more reliable floor. So I think I would just probably go Penny. I think he's kind of the best of both worlds. I have been down on him more so just because I think that people thought he was a threat to Carson, where I think he's not that, but he's still if Carson were to go down, and Carson averaged 20.5 touches per game and has been injured a couple of times already in his career, Penny would then be in line for a massive workload. So I think he still kind of gives you that upside with enough standalone value. But if I had kind of that, if I was a little more secure and I was going for the upside, I would probably go Darrell Henderson, because we don't really know what's going on with Gurley. And I think Henderson is they've said they envision the Chris Thompson role for him. He actually fits a specific need in their offense, which is a shotgun back, because Gurley was never good in the shotgun, under 3 yards a carry in both years under McVay. So I really like the upside of Henderson, but I don't know if you can. I don't think you can rely on him from week to week from the jump. So I would just go Rashad Penny there.
All right, final question here. In an auction draft, which two studs would you pair? So if you want, you can go to the draft kit here. You can go to the auction cheat sheet builder, set a budget of 200, and let's just pretend as if this is a PPR league with 12 teams, normal roster settings, and you can generate the cheat sheet just to kind of give you a sense of the values that we're giving. The thing is, auctions are like, they're so unique. Each one is different. I think you really have to divide the players into tiers. And so instead of thinking about wanting particular players, I think you just have to think of, you want a player within this particular tier and then a player within that particular tier, and just kind of take the auction as it comes to you, and attack when you think you have an edge. But I don't know, Chris. I mean, what are your thoughts on this question?
I think you'd be aggressive. I think like if you're a person that's like sitting here watching Chris Raybon and Matthew Freedman, talk to each other on the internet about fantasy football, you probably have a decent handle on like how to play, and you're playing in an auction league. So like I say be aggressive, because what happens a lot of the times is, if you're kind of first to hit with these studs, yes, everyone's going to bid a lot on them, but people are going to kind of bow out at the same time, because they're going to, there's a couple more guys still on the board. Whereas later on, it's like everyone's out of money, and like there's going to be guys that are going to come back around cheap anyway, but they won't be stud. So I think if you kind of have a handle on things, and you're going to be able to spot those, key guys that you can get for like $1, a couple of dollars late in the draft and whatnot, I think you want to be aggressive, especially early on, and just go out and get a couple studs in an auction.
The one thing I will say is, I think Juju is someone worth bidding on, both because I like him anyway. I have him projected for a lot, but the bigger thing is that I think people, if you nominate him early in the process, I think people will think, okay, he's not as good as Hopkins. He's not as good as Adams. He's maybe not as good as Julio or Beckham. And they'll think, I'm not going to pay up for him when I can save my money for those guys. When in reality, I think he has the potential to match them. I just think that his sort of market value across fantasy football players is not as high as it probably should be. So I think there might be the opportunity to get him at a discount.
And I'll actually piggyback off that and say I have an interesting Juju theory that, when you guys kind of asked me, you guys got to check out this latest action pod when it drops, because it was really good with Reeves, you and I, and of course Sean Corner. But Juju, there's a chance he could have a down week one. If you go and look back at what the Patriots did, so like the second half of last year, Adam Thielen 528-1, Stephon Diggs 549-0, Antonio Brown 449-1, Juju himself 4 catches on 10 targets for 40 scoreless yards, Tyreek Hill in the AFC Championship 3 targets 1 catch, Travis Kelce 3 catches 23 yards and a touchdown. So like they were just back to their ways of like zeroing in on the top option. It's going to be a little bit easier with AB not there. So like I think there's a chance that like there's people out there that might like, oh hey, I was wrong on this Juju guy already. Like after one game, people are silly. So I would be looking to trade for him after week one. Even if you don't draft him, you might be able to get even more value. So I'm kind of looking out for that.
Okay, that is really sharp, I think. So on the one hand, I think that is absolutely right. If he has a bad week, I think it's a great opportunity to trade for him. On the other hand, I think he might not have as bad of a week as you would expect. In part, the reason there are 2 things. One, I think he could just continue to develop into his 3rd year. The Steelers could move him around the formation and try to scheme him open. But the bigger part of that actually is that the Patriots experiment a lot in their first 4 weeks of the year. And so you can see it each year defensively. They often are really weak in the first month, and then they start to really coalesce on defense, and they get better as the season progresses. And so it wouldn't be surprising if we saw that trend again this year.
No, that's a great point. I think that's something that is very underlooked. The Saints do that as well. We see that with the Saints too. But the one thing I will say, and like that, I was kind of thinking about this too, actually, was that this year they actually do have a number of like the defense is pretty much still intact.
It's the same as it was last year.
Yeah, so like a lot of last year, the reason I think they got so good at like taking out the number one option again, which was something they kind of became known for in the past, was those younger guys like Jackson, and they started to kind of come together. Now they lost Flowers, but they're kind of willing to give up these pass rushers, and I think it was PFF that did an article that kind of showed that coverage is actually more important. Like statistically than even pass rush. Like it's like they're both kind of complement each other, but coverage is where you want to be. And like I just think, like, I'm worried. I'll put it that way. I'm worried about him the same way I was like a little worried about Tyreek Hill, and we saw how that kind of panned out. Like, this is something that the Patriots they take pride in doing. So like I'm just excited because I think we will be able to trade. Like, I don't think Juju has a blow up game. I'll put it that way. Like, maybe he goes like 6 for 52 or something, and like, something fine in PPR, but like, I think there's a decent chance that he has like a game, and you can kind of get a major coup by just trading for him after week 1. So I'm excited.
Very possible. All right, Chris, good show. Everyone be sure to follow us in the Action Network app at Chris Raybon and Matt F. The Oracle. Use the app to get real-time odds and to track your bets for free. That is going to do it for this episode of the Action Network live show. We will see you again next episode. Bye, everyone.